Next, we have a couple of people from Lost Pines GCD or LRE helping out Lost Pines. We have Elvis Hernandez, who somehow I don't know, and I don't know how I don't know. He is got a lot of experience with engineering, has been on the board at Lost Pines GCD and president of the board most recently, and then he is doing interim managing, which I have done before, and it is not super fun. Good luck. And then we have Gretchen Miller, who has been doing water science in Texas for a very long time, well respected. I think everyone probably knows Gretchen, and they're going to talk to us about how science is shaping groundwater management in Bastrop and Lee counties.
Hello. Thank you for that introduction. Welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Elvis Hernandez. A little bit about my background. I have a bachelor's and a master's in electrical engineering from Cornell. I then went to work for Bell Labs for 12 years. And then for 20 years, I worked for Cisco Systems, where my specialty was network management and monitoring of very large, complex, global, worldwide voice over IP systems, and collecting data and reporting and tools. So when I then joined the board and was appointed to the Lost Pines board 3.5 years ago, it was kind of natural for me to get on board with all the science and the monitoring aspects of it. I've been on the board was on the board for 3.5 years. My first year as Treasury Secretary, and then I was president of the board for the last 2.5 years. And for the last month and a half or so, I've been interim general manager.
Afternoon. My name is Gretchen Miller. I have a background in groundwater and engineering. My bachelor's and my master's are from the University of Missouri-Rolla in geological engineering, and a PhD from University of California, Berkeley in environmental engineering. I have been working in consulting for 3 years now. I'm currently at LRE Water, and previously, I was at Texas A&M University, where I taught groundwater and advanced groundwater, as well as fluid mechanics. And I am a groundwater modeler at heart, but we're going to talk a little bit about our data collection today as well.
That's the clicker. All right.
There we go.
All right, so first I want to just start off with just locating where the Lost Pines Groundwater District is. We're kind of in the middle of Texas and central Texas, and in the middle of the Carrizo-Wilcox group. And so that shows Bastrop and Lee County. We're about just east of Austin. I guess we can go to the next slide. Mm-hmm. A little bit about the counties. We are just east of Austin, or for those of us in Bastrop, we say we are just east of weird. So that's a little saying that we've got there. And Lee County is by and large rural, and Bastrop County was rural, at least parts of it, and it's growing very, very rapidly with the introduction of SpaceX and the Boring Company, et cetera. So we've experiencing very rapid growth, and we also have the Colorado River flowing through Bastrop. We have several large permits that have not yet begun. We have a recharge permit. Phase 2 is 25,000 acre-feet per year. Gatehouse is 18,500 acre-feet per year, and LCRA is 8,000 acre-feet per year, and these have not yet begun. So when I joined the board had lots of questions. We needed to determine what are the impacts of these large permits to the district wells and to our aquifers. Which aquifers are our wells completed in? A lot of our wells did not have an aquifer setting. And what should be the locations of our DFC official wells? Where should they be at? And what are the impacts of the DFCs? We have, for example, a 240-foot drawdown DFC in the Simsboro. What is that impact to our aquifers and to our wells? So there was lots of questions, and we needed some answers. So that's when we reached out to LRE. We needed a plan to address those shortcomings, and LRE Water was hired on to provide some modeling expertise and guidance. And we sat down with LRE, I think it was early 22, and we created a timeline to address those gaps and in a systematic way. And the foundation of that was the three-dimensional mapping that we first engaged with.
So the three-dimensional mapping form the basis of much of what we've done moving forward with Lost Pines data. And the main principle of this is that we can know where our aquifers are generally, but this system is very complex. We have 13 relevant hydrogeologic layers in this area. And we need to know things like when we put a well at such and such number of feet, are we in the Simsboro? Are we in the Hooper? We need to have this information to make these sorts of decisions about permits, about water levels, about DFCs, and without a really comprehensive knowledge of the layers and the layers of the geology, locations of the faults, this is a very difficult proposition. So to start the 3D mapping project, we analyzed over 2,000 geophysical logs over the course of a year, and we assigned, based on these geophysical logs, aquifer depths and thickness, and created, so example of geophysical log, we took this and we assigned, based on what we knew the geophysical signatures were, assigned aquifer layers. Right, so we said this one's the Calvert Bluff, this one's the Simsboro. And so we take this 1D surface geologic map and we think about projecting it into the page, right? We're like, how far down at any given point is the aquifer of interest and how many layers are above it and how many layers are below it? So when we look at all this data and we put it together, we use a system called Leapfrog to view this and to interpolate between points. So each of these geophysical logs is a point in space and a depth, right? And we could take that and say each of these points, control points, shows us that an aquifer layer is at a certain depth in this certain place. And then we interpolate over space to see where our layers are. When you look at the map, right, you can see that same geologic map at the surface. But then as you move downward into the third dimension, you see all of the layers that are underneath. And this idea of layers forming all of these aquifers is something that a geologist knows intuitively, but that the general public almost always struggles with. What do you mean I have more than one aquifer underneath me? What do you mean my well's not in that aquifer that I thought it was in, right? So when we did this 3D mapping project, our big goal was to be able to tell people quickly and easily from the data where their wells were, right? What their wells were tapping and how they might interact with their neighbors, right? Somebody with a Simsboro well versus somebody with a Carrizo well, you know, they interact differently, right, than two Simsboro wells right next to each other. And people have a hard time understanding this. Okay, so the next thing that the district wanted us to look at was how we were talking about drawdown, right? Again, drawdown's a concept that's fairly intuitive to hydrogeologists, but not at all intuitive to the public, right? They think, okay, well, you know, I know somebody's pumping over here, they're gonna lower my water level, but how and why and where, right? And I think this is compounded by how we talk about the DFCs, right? When we talk about them, we're talking an average drawdown over an area. Well, what does that really mean for somebody who's right next to one of these big well fields that are going in versus somebody who is nearly 2 counties away, right? So when we talked this through, we talked about converting drawdown instead of just a 240 feet across the Simsboro DFC. We're going to say, well, can we talk about this in a term that matters more? Say like percentage remaining artesian head, right? Because we know people's wells won't go dry if they are in a confined aquifer and we still have artesian head left, right? So that is a really very clear cutoff, and we can tell people, well, your well, if it's in this aquifer, is not going to go dry until we are at 0% remaining artesian head. Okay, so we can express the DFC, in maybe something different than the traditional way, that it might be more meaningful to people. And we can also express it by saying, okay, well, we have a percent remaining artesian head, and then we can average that across the whole district, or we can average that by wells. And by saying, okay, we have a 75% or a 50% remaining artesian head by well, we get a better idea about how we might be planning for impacts of the decisions that we make. So for instance, if you're talking to a potential permit holder and they say, our potential permittee, and you're negotiating maybe an impact relief or a mitigation fund, thinking of something as in a change in artesian head based on wells gives you a better idea of what your mitigation fund might need to do. So framing drawdown in this way tends to give people a better idea of what the future, the long-term impacts might be, as opposed to just saying, oh, we're going to have this amount of drawdown.
Can you just go back 1 second? So what we determined was that our DFCs, on average, will keep 50% remaining artesian head in our wells in the year 2070. And drawdown and our percent remaining artesian head, they're equivalent. You can convert back and forth between drawdown and percent remaining artesian head. And when LRE did so, we determined that our current DFCs will keep 50% remaining artesian head on average in our wells. And we decided, yeah, that's what we want. We want to keep some groundwater left for our grandchildren, as Mr. Westbrook said yesterday. And we thought that keeping half there for the future made quite a lot of sense. So on this next graph, this next cartoon here, I took this concept from Mr. Andy Weir. Basically, the difference, we feel that percent remaining artesian head gives more insights to the public. When the folks out in the public hear that there's going to be a 240-foot drawdown in the Simsboro, they don't know what it means. You get scared. So like the woman on the right here who's blindfolded and she's approaching a cliff, and you tell them, hey, you got 7 steps. Well, she doesn't know if on step number 3 or step number 7 if she's going to fall off the cliff. Now, compare it to the gentleman. It's relative, so there's a starting point. So if you say, hey, take 7 steps, but you're only going to be 70% the way there, well, then he can confidently take those 7 steps knowing he's not going to fall off the cliff. So that's why we decided to use both, and we're going to be using both to present that information to the public. So next, we wanted to tackle our database and the aquifer settings. We wanted to see to evaluate the effects of these groundwater permits and our DFCs, the effects on our aquifers, and to the wells in our district.
So going back to this idea of dewatering and dewatering an aquifer, one of the danger zones we've always identified is that when we're in an area around the outcrop and we're talking about drawdowns over time, the areas where we are already either under water table conditions or where we could easily be converted from confined to water table conditions are the places that are most likely to see the first impacts of an overall water level decline throughout the district. And so, we know that we are where these vulnerable areas might be based on, again, back to the 3D model and the geometry of these aquifers. We know when we lower the water table by a certain amount, it's going to show up in certain places first, right? So people's wells are going to be most at risk. We're using this as a proxy because very frequently we don't have data on where people's pumps are. So when your water level falls below your pump, that is really when you need some mitigation on your well, right? But getting pumped, as I'm sure many people in the room know, getting pump location data is probably the biggest challenge of looking at any individual's well, trying to figure that out. And across the district, that is a huge data issue, right? We looked at what, if we're on trajectory for these DFCs, what areas would be impacted by, say, a 240-foot decline, where those will show up and how that will change over time. But we should say that we know that without some sort of action by the district, I'm going to use the curtailment word. I know we're all scared of that one. We know that the DFCs would be exceeded based on the amount of permits. We've seen that in the modeling efforts. So looking at the projected well impacts, this is just a visual way we want to display to people, where are the danger zones in this regard. And so we did a mapping exercise where we said, okay, if we have 50 feet of drawdown, that red area is going to be a problem. If we have 150 feet of drawdown, see how that red area along that outcrop boundary expands and starts to come into areas where it had been previously combined. And then if we have that 250 feet, that is the DFC, these are the areas which could potentially be problems. So we can then identify wells in those bands, right? The other thing that this sort of modeling does is say, okay, what is the remaining artesian head in areas away from these bands, right? And it gives people a little bit of reassurance when they're not in these zones that there is probably more water in the aquifer than that DFC again would imply, right? So we can talk about this in a little bit more spatial distinction, right? As opposed to, again, the DFCs, as we talk about them usually, aren't spatially explicit. That would be too complicated. But when talking to the public, it does matter because what they care about is where their well is and not, the whole value of the district.
Okay, so next we needed to expand on monitoring network. We employed LRE to conduct a study to identify the optimal monitoring well locations across all of our aquifers and regions across the district. As Dr. Miller stated, we have many, many aquifer formations underneath, and we needed to make sure that we had coverage across all of those. As we know, there's plenty of interaction amongst the Wilcox group, and so we wanted to make sure that we caught those interactions and those drawdowns in the adjacent formations. So the plan was to expand our monitoring network from about 20, 30 wells that we had to over 100 DFC monitoring wells. And our strategy is to have biannual water level measurements and also baseline water quality on all of our DFC wells.
All right, so this is the map of when LRE did this analysis of where the current wells are, shown in pink, and then the blue and the yellow wells are locations that we have identified that would or should be ideally added, and that these are locations where the districts would reach out to landowners for permission to look at their wells. We also identified a few abandoned oil and gas wells that could be beneficial to monitoring if we could make the proper requests and connections there as well. When we looked at these, we looked at a couple of different factors. One thing we thought about first was data density. Previously, the monitoring network had a number of wells in it that weren't giving us extra information, or that weren't giving information that made a difference in decision making, because either maybe they were too close to other wells in the same formation, or they were too uncertain in their construction. There's a number of wells that we just don't know where they're actually screened, and without putting a camera down them, we might not know. And wells that weren't, just weren't serving their purpose. So we first eliminated a set of those. Oh, yeah. Checking on time. Then we also looked at the new structure map to say, okay, where are there wells we thought were in a certain aquifer that actually aren't, right? We identified some of those. We also identified areas, and you can see one example of this up in northeastern Lee County, where we have a part of the Milano fault structure. So the Milano fault structure runs through here, and we have a graben in that area. And so hence the density of wells in that area to try to capture that. And again, that well field that you should have heard of, mentioned in the last presentation, is in that general vicinity.
That would be Vista Ridge.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
that's why there's so many wells in that Lexington area, is because of the Vista Ridge project right across the county line. Mm-hmm. And as Dr. Miller said, there's a Tanglewood graben there that also compounds the problem.
Yeah. So then the other thing we're looking at is, again, back to the vulnerable areas. Can we add wells, can we add wells that are along the edges of the outcrops that give us more early warning to issues?
So then we did a data management overhaul where we integrated with a HAF database in 2022. We took the three-dimensional mapping data that LRE had provided, and we ported that into the HAF tool, into their boring tool, the bore tool. So that is now up to date with the best data that we've got, the three-dimensional data. We did a major update last year where we added aquifer settings and well construction details to many of our wells that were lacking that information. Our board passed a resolution to archive and report all the comprehensive well information and to archive it all in the database. We've added, as part of the HAF tool, we've added a bulk upload tool so that we can bulk upload water levels and water production. And then we began also tracking unregistered wells in our database. There are lots of wells that predate the groundwater district, and so they're registered with the state, but they're not registered with the Lost Pines. And so we've been tracking those and trying to get those registered. All right, and here's just a map. When you first log in, we have about 5,000 wells located in Bastrop and Lee counties. That's all I'll say on that one. Just pretty. It's a pretty picture, but...
So here's an example of the bore tool. And again, this goes back to that foundational 3D modeling tool, or the 3D model. And this is a way to display what would normally be fairly complex data in, say, a GIS system in a way that is a little bit more friendly to the public and, frankly, friendly to the hydrogeologist that wants to go and say, okay, we're going to put a well in, here's where we want to put it. It's a nice, quick, easy tool that basically goes to those rasters of elevation for each of the formation tops and says, okay, here's the top of that formation, here's the top of the next formation. It's all programmed into the database itself and the interface, and it's a really handy and convenient thing, especially when we're doing things like reviewing permits or talking to drillers. We have a much better idea. And these also help us take into account differences between, say, the graben and the other side of the formation, because, previously when people do these kinds of what depths do I put my well in, they go and they look at all the nearby wells and see what depth their neighbors' wells are at, right? And sometimes it works great, but sometimes it fails kind of spectacularly if they don't realize they're on the other side of a fault. Right? And again, this Milano fault zone that goes through really defines a lot of this 3D structure. And so it's important to use a tool like this to make that easily accessible.
Just FYI, this is the location. We picked our district offices in Giddings, Texas, because that had most of all the formations in Lee County. And as you can see, there's quite a few different formations underneath our district office. Mm-hmm. All right, so in 2024, we applied for and received a matching grant from the Bureau of Reclamation to improve our local model, and that is underway right now, and that is in progress.
Yeah, so we are looking at, much like other districts are looking at creating this local model to give us better decision-making capabilities. As many of you know, the GAMs are big regional models and help us make decisions when we're talking to other districts or when we're talking at a regional scale. But the decisions made, say, putting a pumping well into them, right? They aren't necessarily at the fine resolution that we need them to be. So creating a local model, as you know, is pretty beneficial in that sort of local decision making. And when we have such detailed geologic data, it's a shame not to take advantage of that, right? So updating this model or creating this model, I think will give us those capabilities. As part of the model upgrades, we're transitioning to ModFlow 6. The GAM is in USG, and we're creating this high-resolution Voronoi grid to help us better understand particularly the alluvium, but also the fault structure. And so some recent work coming out of Water Development Board on modeling across faults has really instructed some of what we know we're going to need to do, talking about flow across these fault blocks, because it can be really an issue if you're not respecting the displacement and you're trying to model these layers as continuous. So that's one thing we're hoping to do in there. And really, we want more accurate scenario analysis for permitting decisions. That's the big goal here. Okay, so this is a grid that we've been developing. We are working with Michelle Sutherland at Envision Water and with Bill Hutchinson as part of this project. And I just really, to give you an idea of what these grids look like, they're not our regular rectangular grids. You can see the alluvium and the drain areas here in much, much more detail. And then you can see our little sliver of yellow here. This is the depth to the aquifer top, right? And we can capture the fact in the Carrizo that we have this faulting using this type of grid. And it gives us a much better capability of what happens when you put a water well here and how does it interact with either side of the fault there.
All right, so today's data is tomorrow's foundation. Groundwater sustainability depends on consistent high-quality data collection, archiving, and reporting. Just like monitoring voice over IP global networks, same thing with monitoring the aquifers. We need continued partnership and continued funding are essential to expand monitoring and improve our models. And our work today is the foundation for informed decisions and resilient water management for tomorrow and for our grandchildren. So with that, thank you so much. And yes, my real name is Elvis, and I've heard all the jokes, so Elvis has left the building. Any questions? Oh, one question. I guess Elvis has not left yet.
Hi, I was just wondering if your well impact analysis helped you all determine your DFC, or you all had determined your DFC and then you did the well impact analysis after the DFC was determined?
The DFC is determined based upon the aquifer condition. So the aquifer condition is the 50% remaining artesian head on average. So that's what drove our decision to keep the DFCs the same this cycle, and it's based upon the desired aquifer condition of keeping 50% on average remaining artesian head in our wells in the year 2070. So that's what drove that. It wasn't necessarily the wells, it was the aquifer.
Yeah, timing-wise, it was DFCs were set last cycle, did the impact analysis, and then DFCs are being set for the next cycle right now.
Do you
So-
all see that the well impact analysis could inform either modifying or changing your DFCs at the next round?
It could. It could, but we'll see. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Scott?
Thank you.